Folks, welcome back to another episode of The Fallen Badge. Today, the murder of Texas Ranger Stanley Guffey, Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas Rangers. Ranger Guffey was 40 years old. Now, he had 18 years of law enforcement experience. I believe the first 10 was with the Texas Department of Public Safety. He was a trooper. The last 8 years he was a Texas Ranger. Now, he had a wife and he had children. Now, the story we're going to be talking about, it's going to be about the kidnapping of a 2-year-old little girl by a convict who had warrants. I don't know how he picked out this area, but he traveled up from Houston to Horseshoe Bay, Texas. Now, after all is said and done, Ranger Guffey, the suspect, and a 22-year-old babysitter are all going to be dead. Now, this is going to begin on January 14th, about 2 p.m. The babysitter calls, talks to her employer's secretary, and said, "I think I'm being kidnapped. I think there might be a bomb in the house." Now, Horseshoe Bay has its own security police, so they went to the house and they couldn't find the babysitter/maid anywhere. Now, about 6 days later, police put it out to the media because they still hadn't found the young lady. Now, January 22nd, 1987, about 4 a.m., call comes into the little girl's family, the little 2-year-old. Male voice on the other end says that "I've kidnapped your 2-year-old daughter," and he demanded money. Well, now he called back again about 10 hours later. He said he wanted money. He also implied that he had killed the little babysitter/maid. Now, later on, when they interviewed the little girl, what little she could talk about the incident, they seemed to think that possibly the babysitter/maid was still alive at that time on that second call. Now, the later investigation would show that the suspect was hiding in a house across the street from the victim's house. This makes you wonder if the police ever did a canvass of the area, which is usually pretty typical. So 9:25 that night, per instructions of the suspect, because he had said, "I want a car and I want $30,000 and I want in $20 bills." So the victim's daddy drove up in I believe it was a Lincoln Town car, parked it in the driveway in front of that house, got out and walked away. Now, there was a briefcase on the front seat with the money. Now, what the police had done, they had removed the rear seat, and 2 Texas Rangers, Ranger Guffey and Ranger Adcock, they were hiding back there in that trunk area, and they had access to the interior of the car. So now the suspect, he came out of the house, he had the little girl. Now, he was supposed to leave the little girl in the yard, but I guess he figured that the police might pull something, so he put the little girl in the car. Police would later say they kind of figured he would lie about leaving the little girl alone. Well, the suspect, he starts to get in the car. He looks, makes sure the money's in the briefcase. He takes the briefcase, throws it in the back seat. Well, that's when he sees the 2 Rangers. Now, Ranger Guffey, he hollered out a warning to surrender. Suspect, he hopped out of the car and started firing rounds. Authorities said he had a .44 automatic. He was carrying it in a shoulder holster. Now, Ranger Guffey, he was hit a couple of times, and his partner that was laying up in the back seat area, he cranked off rounds and shot and killed the suspect. Now, a little bit after the shooting, they had rushed Ranger Guffey to the hospital, and he had died there. The suspect, he was DOA on the scene. Now, they found the babysitter/maid. She was in a boathouse nearby. She had tape over her mouth. She was tied up I'm not going to go into the rest of it. Suspect did some very horrible things to that little girl. 22 years old, and she hadn't done anything wrong. Medical examiner ruled her death as a homicide. Now, something else that the district attorney was looking into, he found out there had been a report where security officers for Horseshoe Bay had actually stopped and detained that suspect a month earlier. And he had a pistol on him then. It was tied around, it was a rope or something tied around his neck. So that gun would hang down about the middle of his chest, which that's an old trick that some of these old ex-cons will do because they figured the police maybe won't check that center of the chest area. But in any event, they had him. And whatever they did, they decided to let him go, which is very unfortunate. Now, they were able to determine later that the suspect had been living in the attics of the unoccupied houses there in that neighborhood, and that he had a collection of weapons that he'd been stealing from houses there at Horseshoe Bay. Now, the security force that they used for this area, they were under the county's jurisdiction, and they pretty well got canceled out right after this event. Now, the ranger in charge there at the scene, he told the media that they were going to put money in that car, and since they were going to put money in that car, they were going to put officers in that car. They said there's no way they were going to let that suspect have that car with that kidnapped victim and allow him to leave that area. That's why the decision was made to put 2 rangers in there. Now, both rangers had volunteered for that assignment. Come to find out, too, it would later be discovered that it took them a while to find a car. They needed a 4-door car, and they needed a nice car, one that they could remove part of that back seat where they could lay in the trunk and back seat area. Now, the child was rescued unharmed. Texas Ranger Stanley Keith Guffey. End of watch, January 22nd, 1987.